Right. Hi, guys. Today, I didn't really have much time to prepare, and I hope you will participate. So today, I decided to go into pricing because really that's what I'm into right now. It's not going to be heavy on math this time. I think I'm going to make it sometimes a bit more difficult, like last week or last session. Sometimes it's going to be easier. So today, yeah, the preamble. I don't need a disclaimer. I mean, it's obviously educational. Suppose I should put up the Aramir page, but anyway, that doesn't really matter. So yeah, I hope that as time goes by, it's going to be a bit more interactive. But okay, so no straight path, and it's not a train course. It's more or less topics as I fancy. And I was actually looking at the last session presentation, and I looked at this calendar, and I thought, well, this is actually an interesting topic in terms of pricing. Some of you have requested my Black and Scholes spreadsheet. And for those who don't have one, of course, I can send it to you. That one has something interesting into it because you can automatically download the underlying price, the rates, and if I'm not mistaken, even the yields, the dividend yields. So you've got already 2 or 3 elements in the Black and Scholes equation. So pricing is actually easier. So today, why I decided to go on to this topic is because I wanted to, I mean, previously when I started pricing options and several legs, I noticed that when you price in the same expiration, it's all easy, all very easy. But when you start dealing with horizontal spreads, when I started pricing, I never got that pointy peak here. I mean, it was always like this. Even on expiration, I couldn't get that peak. And I realized that there was something wrong in the way I approach Black and Scholes. So we're going to go into that. And basically, that's the next. I hope you can see my screen because I know my internet connection here is not as good as in Europe. But so we're going to have a look at how we calculate and plot a calendar. And for that matter, any horizontal spread. So you have that Black and Scholes, or I suppose you have one. It doesn't have to be mine. And we have to assume that because Black and Scholes being what we call a closed equation. So if you have IV, you can get the price, and if you have price, you can extract IV. So, and to make matters simpler, generally, we assume that, in particular, when you trade OTM, your IV skew will be fairly straight. So we can approximate it as an ATM IV, so the IV at the money, and a slope. I will get into more sophisticated topics later. I know what Gary or must be thinking about, because for example, if I look at, let's have a look at, oh wow, it's jumping back. If I look at option volatility, as you can see, this approximation is not exactly right. And you can even notice that concavity, which is not unusual, but let's say that in other market environments, I'm going to say, I'm going to say low IV, high IV. This is probably typical to a high IV environment where you have maybe some excess hedging that pushes the prices, that pushes the IV out of the money. So, and for that matter, I will, in my program, and as I code it, I will put it in a future session, how to approach that concavity. But let's say that for now you have an ATM IV, so ATM is roughly around here. The bottom of the IV curve is in the money for puts, and we're going to assume that this is a straight line for now. So if you have the ATM IV and roughly the slope or the gradient of that line, if we assume it as a line, as a straight line, you can then more or less price what options out of the money puts prices will be. So going back to this slide, with a Black-Scholes pricing spreadsheet, and assuming you have some what I call an IV skew estimate, you can then figure out how to calculate IV everywhere. So of course you need those options prices to model IV, and again I will go back to a more complex topic. I just wanted this one to be fairly lightweight. Who's coughing? Something I've mentioned earlier, but I think it's actually a good time to get back to that. So I call it an aside, or taking a step back, is how do we extract IV from options prices? The most common algorithm is something we call a root finding or root extracting algorithm, and it's called Raphson-Newton. Raphson-Newton is basically an algorithm that helps you find the zero in a function. So if a function, let's say a parabola, crosses the zero in 2 points, it will try and find in the right range where for which x you get y equals 0. It's not a very difficult algorithm, and in my Black-Scholes spreadsheet, that little algorithm, Raphson-Newton, is also included. That one works well if you have only one unknown variable. So if we assume in Black-Scholes that you've got price as a function of S, the underlying, X, the strike, FR, the risk-free rate, ETE, time to expiration, volatility and dividend yield. If you can have, of course, the underlying, the strike, the rates, the TT, the time to expiration, and dividend yield all known, then you can extract vol from prices. So that's actually easy. So I use IB, but it could be TOS, it could be any other source. If you have the price, if you have, in particular, the risk-free rate and the dividend yield at your disposal, you will find the volatility. And from that volatility, you can actually, using, even in Excel, any polynomial regression, or as I mentioned just now, even a straight line, a typical least square regression, you will find the line. So the gradient that goes through those points, more or less. There is a slightly more complex algorithm that could be more appropriate if you don't know, if there are two unknown variables. And in these two, Raphson-Newton and Nelder-Mead, are standard algorithms that are used in any applied math courses. I mean, this is not, these are not algorithms that have been designed for options pricing whatsoever. I mean, it's really something that you use in physics or any other field. So if you want to take into account an unknown variable being the dividend yield, and the dividend yield is sometimes a problem. It is a problem as such in Black-Scholes, because if a coupon, I'm using the bonds jargon, but if the dividend is being distributed, of course, there's a part of the value of the stock that is going away. So typically, Black-Scholes will not deal very well with sudden moves. If some value in the underlying is getting away, pricing will not find an equilibrium very quickly. So dividend is potentially an issue, and that's why Black-Scholes, even if it has been tweaked to be able to deal with dividend producing stocks, it does not really do a great job. And even the Bjerkreim, which is in the same family, an extension of Black-Scholes, it still doesn't. It does a little bit better to accommodate for the pricing for that possibility of being exercised, but it's still not perfect. All those models are basically, you know, in mathematics or in physics, you know, you have your hypothesis and you have to make sure that you use your formula in the right context. The dividend derivation on Black-Scholes or Bjerkreim both assume continuous dividend. That's why the best way to deal with dividend yields would be to, and actually IB provides, the API provides that information, but that's in saying that, I assume that the API works fine and that the information is always available, which is not the case. But anyway, so the best way to deal with dividend yields then is to use a discounted value of future dividend yields. So that's the best way to deal with something that comes as a one-off or once or twice a year. So, and I will come back to Gary is quite familiar with what I'm going to say now, but the best way to deal with that is actually to eliminate completely the dividend yield impact on pricing. So if you want to, if I recap here, if you know your dividend yield or the discounted value of your dividend yield, you put it in your equation, and you can then assume you have only one unknown variable, which is volatility. And basically, with vol you get price, with price you get vol. I mean, that's quite simple. You use Raphson Newton on one side, and you use the straight Black-Scholes on the other side. Quite simple. If you want to assume two unknowns, and you want to use Nelder-Mead, sorry, Nelder-Mead to from prices, use Nelder-Mead to figure out what dividend yield or discounted value dividend yield would fit in the equation. That will also work. But again, in my view, these are more, I mean, these are more for American options, and Black-Scholes is not exactly suited for American options anyway. Bjerkreim a bit better. Because the dividend yield actually has an effect on pricing, the same way as exercising American options also has an effect on pricing. So if I go back to the algorithms themselves, of course, there are some prerequisites. Raphson Newton requires what we call a volatility guess, or vol guess, and it must not be too far off. If the volatility is high and you put a vol guess that is too low, the algorithm will probably not converge very well. And because it tries to figure out the curve, the IV curve. The IV skew is actually extracted from, I mean, you use IV on different strikes, and you actually try and figure out for each strikes each strike which value of volatility seems to fit the curve. And what I found out is that especially when you trade near expiration, you have a problem, because if you remember what I said in one of previous sessions, when you get close to expiration, the gradient of the curve gets very, very steep. Basically, I don't know whether, I think I can annotate. Yeah, I've never tried that. Let me see if that works. So basically, if you get close to expiration, let's say you've got your ATM here, it will become very steep. Yeah, not very good at this. And the Vol Guess algorithm will not converge well. So in my program, I actually have used a modification on the standard Rafson-Newton to do a better job. But really, in the last day before expiration, it's very difficult to price an option, and that's why probably market makers are more or less at a thumb suck, because you know what your intrinsic value is because you're very close to expiration, but the volatility, the residual volatility, can make your pricing change very rapidly. So, and if I can recommend anyone who trades near expiration, that is to be very, very careful. Not only that, but as you know, if the market closed on a Thursday afternoon, the settlement price will only be available on the Friday morning around 11 a.m. Eastern. So anything can happen. I mean, just imagine that you have something major happening that night. I mean, you can be really, so that's why I say, I mean, maybe I'm overly conservative, but I would say that even on a 1 day 2SD projection, using whatever IV you have to do your projection, be very careful. Be at least 2SD away from being exercised, unless that's your choice. If you're happy to be exercised and get the stock or sell the stock, whatever, but know what you're doing. And if you don't want to be exercised, be at least 2SD away. Right. So this is for the Rafson-Newton, and although this is proprietary, if some of you are keen, I mean, I can share what I've done to actually modify Rafson-Newton to do a better job near expiration. It's not perfect yet, but it's better than the original algorithm. The nail the mead needs what I call reasonable range boundaries. Basically, if you try and figure out vol, or yes, IV, and dividend yields, you need, for example, to know if you know that, for example, your IV is in somewhere, let's say 15%. If you target too wide, it will not converge very well. So you need to know more or less also, you don't need a single estimate, but you need a range boundary, or yes, a range, basically saying that IV will be somewhere between 10 and 20%, and then it will work okay. There again, for those who are interested, I have a Rafson-Newton is included in my Black and Scholes spreadsheet, and I've got a separate spreadsheet for nail the mead, which I'm happy to share if there are people interested. Okay, let me get this is the mouse. Yeah. Okay, so I hope this is clear enough. Okay, so getting back to how do I erase? I've never done this before. Okay. Right. So coming back to my assumption, simplistic maybe assumption, then that IV will be more or less ATM IV and a gradient. The first thing to do is that, of course, we need to pick a strike as close as possible to ATM, to the money, and if you don't have one, you just average out from the closest below and closest above, and I mean, and then you figure out what ATM IV is. There are several possibilities. You can take more points and do a regression, polynomial regression. That all those work. But ATM IV is a very important piece of information. So if you have several points, of course, then you can also do, I mean, no longer ATM, but let's say you take 2 or 3 points further away out of the money, and then you can actually do the regression. I mean, for a line, you need 3 points. For a polynomial, sorry, a line, you need 2 points, but better to have 3. For a polynomial degree 2, like a parabola, you need 3 and better get 4, something like that. So once you have ATM IV and you have your gradients, you have a simple but pretty much accurate IV skew. That IV skew, I invite you to go back to the first sessions, will be probably a better approximate if you are trying to price long-dated options. Let's say 30 DT or more, and even better if it's 60 DT or 70 DT. So I hope this is clear. Okay, I duplicated that. Okay, so which extraction algorithm are we going to use? If we have a reasonable dividend yield estimate, Ralphson-Newton will do fine. And again, you need to have an estimate that is not too far off, and be careful when you get close to expiration. It won't work very well. And now I'm referring to the previous session where I briefly introduced synthetic forward, because now what is probably easier is, and Ari actually directed me to that, and I shouldn't give all credits to Steve Spear for that. Although, okay, I could have thought of it, but I didn't. So with this synthetic can be calculated, and I invite you to go back to the previous session. You can calculate something that Steve calls the UDIV, which is the underlying dividend-free equivalent underlying value. And when you have calculated that, you can then make your calculation simpler, because then you don't have to worry about Nelder-Mead, because if you use the dividend-free equivalent, you can actually set dividend yield to 0 in Black-Scholes. And then considering that you have the strike, the underlying price, the time to expiration is easy to calculate. And as a reminder, the time to expiration is a fraction of a year. It's not a number of days or a number of hours. No, it's a fraction of a year. So basically, you can then very simply get your IV out of price, because you don't have to worry about any second non-variable. So this is actually quite interesting. The good thing is that because I developed my own platform, I could do it. I know that Steve or seasoned, experienced traders who enjoy coding, programming, even if it's only on Excel, can do that. But surprisingly, and that's the same story as for the time-weighted Vega, there's a kind of an inertia. I mean, you don't have it on option view, you don't have it on one. And the good thing is that, well, SOAP is my platform. So basically for our European options, I do calculate the synthetic forward. It's done automatically. You don't have to worry about it. It calculates the UDIV. So I believe I get, at least for European options like SPX options, Russell options, NDX options, I believe I get a much better pricing than other platforms. I have not yet tried on American options. I know, like I mentioned, like Berkshire Standsland is a modification of Black and Scholes to try and accommodate for American options. And I believe you can massage the UDIV, basically massage a put call parity, because that's basically what it takes to calculate it, to also make it work for American options, but I haven't gone into that yet. So if we go back to our calendar, now that we have everything, we have absolutely everything. We know how to calculate a vol skew. So let's assume we are somewhere in your option chain, and you have either your volatility from 8 EMIV plus a gradient of a line. You can figure out what volatility should be somewhere in your option chain. So basically, the calendar price will be, okay, I could put it the other way around, but let's just long or short, but it's basically you calculate Black and Scholes using the underlying, the strike, and of course it's going to be the same strike for both legs. Risk-free rate. Here I made a bit of a small mistake actually. It should be risk-free rate 1 and risk-free rate 2. Time to expiration is obviously different. Volatility is different, and we assume that the dividend yield, okay, the discounted value should be different for both. But if we assume that we're going to be using the UDIV instead of S, we know we're going to put 0 here, so it doesn't really matter. But technically, dividend yield discounted for the first expiration is not the same as for the second expiration. So we have vol 1 and vol 2 from the, as I said, the IV curve, the straight line, whatever. We've got the underlying and the strike, and we assume dividend yield is known or is set to 0. So it's actually quite easy to calculate the calendar price. And if I go back to my first slide, if you do that and you start plotting it, it will give you a round peak here. It will not work. So this is why, I mean, this is not a very complicated topic, but where was I? Yeah, actually here. So for risk-free rate, it's quite easy. You use from various sources on the internet. You can have the risk-free rate for different maturity. So you can get the right risk-free rate for both expirations. That's not a problem. And actually in the spreadsheet I can provide, it's there. And something, a mistake that when people try and work out their own pricer is what time to expiration you want to use. So of course, upon expiration of the first leg, I assume it's it's a short, long calendar. So short the first expiration and long the second one. So TT1 will be 0. So of course, Black and Scholes is easy to calculate. It's basically, it's only the intrinsic value of your first option. And the time to expiry for the second option, let's say the long leg here, will be, of course, TT2, we're talking about as from now, will be TTE, time to expiration 2 minus time to expiration 1. So it's supposed to be simple. But when you actually calculate it, and of course, T plus 0 is generally not an issue. You use the time to expiration for both options, and that's fine. It's sometimes a bit more of an issue when you start projecting T plus N. And I will leave it to you, and almost like as an exercise, but I'm prepared to give you the answer next time. But you have to actually, at T plus N, you have to use the right time to expiry for TTE1 and TTE2. And another thing that you should technically do in your pricing is that at T plus N, you must use not what is the risk-free rate now for option 1 and option 2. If you assume that sometime in the future, at T plus N, you're supposed to calculate what would be the forward rate. So the rate that it will be at that day for that expiration. So, and that again, it can be a second exercise if you want. So I'm happy to share what I've done in SOAP or share pieces of code or whatever. But just think of it that you need to get your time to expiration right in your calculation. Otherwise, you will not get that pointy calendar plot. Okay, as I said, those topics are supposed to be about half an hour long, and then we can discuss. So what I wanted to show is that, I mean, if you do a pricer, I mean, pricing a single option, and that's what my spreadsheet does. That's quite simple. It's actually more interesting if you can price a combo, and pricing a combo in the same expiration is quite easy. As I say here, the Greeks actually add up. So the Greeks of all legs is the sum of all Greeks legs. So not a problem. Same with P&L. So that's usually pretty simple. And if you manage to do that with both vertical and horizontal spreads, you will have a pretty good pricer. And that's the basic thing you need to have if you want to do your calculations. I'm not saying that I want to to get you to code a platform like I'm doing, but even if it's done on Excel, I would say that many advanced traders, intermediate to advanced traders, have their little spreadsheets with prices. And if you follow this line of thinking, you know, getting your IV curve or IV line, and do pay attention to the right inputs, you will have a pretty good pricer for all sorts of configurations. So that's why this is the end of this topic. And of course, this is my interest, almost my passion. It doesn't have to be yours, but if a few of you have actually requested my spreadsheet, and I'm enjoying that. So I would say the next step would be that you start building your pricer for multiple legs, and so that you can and now you have all the tools to actually work out a horizontal spread as much as a vertical spread. Well, I've talked enough for today, but are there any questions? Oh, chat, yes. Can you post the reference to the UDIV calculation? Yes, I can. I got it from Gary, and I believe Gary is here. As long as it's not posted publicly, Gary, can you confirm it's no, if you have it, yeah. I mean, I also have it, but I think as long as it stays in the group and it's not reused, or and like I've done today, all credits for this should be given to Steve. Although it's not rocket science, it's actually quite interesting to play around with that. It's basically massaging and tweaking put-call parity to get your UDIV, and it's quite a handy thing because again, you get some estimates from websites. IB, because I trade on IB. IB gives you what they call the PVDIV, the present value of dividends. You don't know how it's calculated. So the best thing to do, if you can, is just to cancel the effect of dividend yields altogether. I mean, that's, and when I have time, I will try and see how I can extend it to American options. Gary, can you find it? Or otherwise, I'll you know what? I'll post it on the Eremia forum. I'm not sure you can post it here, but you're most welcome to post it on the forum before I do it. Yeah, I will post of course, this presentation, this PowerPoint. So you can't post it here. No, I don't think it's possible to have attachments, or maybe it is or not. No, I don't think it's possible. Right. So I said it wouldn't be too. Yeah.
Got a question. So, what's the difference between I use that to calculate IV. I use that formula with the DTE and the square root of the time, right? But then you're using this Rasmussen thing. So
the square root of the time and IV is to calculate. I'm trying to follow your line of thought, but I believe you want to calculate the standard deviation, the projection deviation.
No, the IV, right? If I know the DTE, right, I just use the square root of the time and then plug in the. It's that simple formula that a lot of people do. Well, I guess it's the standard deviation, right?
Yeah. It's an approximation that is acceptable. Now I see what you mean. Yeah.
But your method, the Rasmussen, is more like you use the whole curve, right? The whole graph to.
Rasmussen-Newton will be on the ball. From price, it will give you the IV for whatever strike and whatever expiration. If you use, and I know options traders use many back of the envelope type of approximation, and the one you mentioned, it is generally okay when the market is in a good contango. When the VIX term structure is flat or in backwardation, it just doesn't work anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
So
I found that out the hard way.
yeah. I mean, we all do. So not that I want to push people into do math, but once Rasmussen-Newton is coded, like I've done it in VBA for Excel, it's done. It's just an equation. I mean, it's something you could put into a calculator. It's a little bit more complex than when you say, but I would say it's more general. So if the market is okay, that's fine. But once it's coded, what doesn't really matter. I mean, you have just a slightly more complex formula, and it does the job. So. But I understand that, a lot of those approximations came around a long time ago before you got those very fancy spreadsheets and even VBA or whatever programming tools you want to use. It's very easy to do in Python. So nothing wrong with that approximation. Just be careful. It only works in contango.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Any other question? You can even ask me, how's the weather like in Mauritius? Yeah, I think the first sessions I was in Portugal, the last two sessions I was in France. Yeah, I moved to Mauritius over the weekend, and this is the beginning of spring, and it's bloody hot already. Yeah, it's a tropical island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. If you don't know it, it's quite nice. Yeah, but anyway, I mean, we can talk about any topic. If you have any other question,
Bruno,
again, yeah.
Do you need a visa to go to Mauritius?
You can stay for 6 months without a visa, if you have a European passport at least. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I've got a few options to stay longer if I like it. Yeah. With a French passport, I can just hop to the next island called Reunion, or I can go back to South Africa because I've got dual citizenship. So I just want to be close to Africa. I just love this continent. But what the surprise for me is that Mauritius, I know it's completely off topic, but Mauritius was discovered by the Portuguese in the 16th century, and then the Dutch came. They never really settled, and the French conquered the island in the 18th century, about 1700. And when Napoleon lost the war at Waterloo, the British took over in 1815. So that's 200 years ago. And guess what? When you land here, everybody speaks French. It's been English for 200 years, and they never switched to English. So all the judicial system, the laws, everything is written in English, but people in the street, they all speak French. But they're all bilingual. They have to learn English. But the lingua franca around town is all French, or French Creole, which is really amazing. And to make it even more of a melting pot, 60% of the population is Indian. So they all speak Hindu on top of it. It's a very interesting melting pot. I really love it. For the little I've seen so far, it's great. Yeah. I work like crazy, 12 hours a day. So at least when I'm not in front of my computer, I enjoy being in a nice place. It's like sprinkling a little bit of a holiday atmosphere. It's just an hour a day, you know. I never take holidays, but at least I live in a holiday place. So that's what I enjoy about life. Yeah. Anyway, back to option. Yes?
What do you use for your computer?
Computer, I've got my 2 laptops, and they've got fiber optic here. So
Apple
that's the
or
first
PC?
thing I ask wherever I go. Sorry?
Apple or PC?
I've got both, one Apple and one PC. Okay. But I used to be an Apple guy, and I'm more and more onto Windows, because since Windows 10, I think Windows does great things. I mean, it works fine, really. I was an Apple guy until in the 80s up to the mid 90s. Then Windows, when I thought Windows, I think it was 95 or 97 at the time, looked okay. And then I went back to Apple, and I think now, I mean, Apple, they're nice machines. They work fine, but they're a bit limited when you want to code. And I think if you want to start programming, you can do a lot on Apple, and Windows actually is releasing the core platform is called .NET. It's a framework for programming, which makes actually things a lot easier than in the past. And now Microsoft is releasing soon what they call .NET Core version 3, which will be cross-platform, so really platform independent. I'm not using it yet, but I'm not using much of the core features of Windows, because I do basically, displaying stuff on the form or on a window and do calculations. So for this type of application, I believe my SOAP program could work on Apple as soon as the .NET Core version 3 is out. It's at beta stage, but I'll be keen to try it out. Yeah. And .NET Core will work just as well on Linux. So really, there's that convergence, which makes the computer environment you're working on completely irrelevant, which is a good thing.
Are you using iCore 7 or iCore 9 for processing?
Oh no, you're talking iCore. You're talking about the processor. I'm talking about .NET Core.
Right.
I know it's a bit, which is let's say the libraries I use to code my program use .NET Framework, and it's version 4.8 for Windows. But at the same time, Microsoft is releasing what they call it a core framework, which is supposed to be a more limited version of the .NET framework, which will be portable across platforms, across And so as soon as it's released, I'm going to try and compile my program using .NET Core and not the Windows .NET to see if it still works. And if it still works, then it will be easy to port it onto a Mac. But for now, I've got enough problems with pricing and coding. Like when the market dropped earlier, I was not the only one. I test my own program SOAP against OptionNet Explorer, and the pricing went completely berserk. I mean, I don't know whether you noticed. I tried to close my October trade, and I see 2900 has been rejected. That's actually a good thing. So that means that there probably won't be that mean reversion. I was looking for possible mean reversion to the 2930s, but no, it won't happen. Not yet. Yeah. I hope your trades are doing okay. I mean, we're talking about various things, but my trades are actually doing fine. I just closed my October trade. I've got two variants of the Rhino. I've got what I call the regular, which is basically my variant, and the something called the BTB, which is by the book. It's a trade more for beginner. And for 3 or 4 months in a row, the simpler beginner style Rhino has done better. I mean, yeah. So sometimes, you try and be smart, but the market always smarts you, and you just have to keep things simple. That's basically what it is. Oops. Oh, yeah. I'm using the beta version of 1, and I don't know what it does, but now I've lost oh, there it is. Yeah. Yeah. So I hope your trading is doing okay. If you want to ask any other questions, the main rationale for me to go into pricing and do my own platform is that I was not satisfied with OptionView. OptionView, of course, if you use, I mean, the pricer, the little tricks, the little tools I've just talked about, will help you build your EIO, each individual option on its own, to use the OptionView jargon. On TOS, it's going to be called individual volatilities. With a bit of work and what I've told you today and on the previous sessions, you should be able to do a simple pricer for using individual volatilities. You should, if you use that mode, you should be able to do just as well as TOS. There's no reason. You can use the RTD calls in a spreadsheet to get prices. You've got everything, and I can help you if you want to do more, but you have everything to do a mini TOS, let's say, using individual volatilities. That's very simple. When I started this options mechanics, I thought I would go straight into volatility surface, but as time passes, I realize that there's always a need to get slowly into. So I will get into volatility surface and the problems in figuring out the right modeling, the right regressions, multivariable regression. So I'll get into that. But I think at this point, you've got enough to do your individual vol type of pricing and do your. I mean, it brings a lot of satisfaction to be able to do your plotting yourself on Excel, or if you can program or whatever programming language, you can do a little program to do it. Because to build confidence in trading, either you blindly trust a platform, and that's what I was trading on OptionView for years, I think since 2008 and when I realized last year or in the year before that it was not doing a good job, you start being kind of destabilized, unsettled. You need to trust your platform. So of course now volatility is at a healthier level. It seems to be doing a good job. Modeling Black-Scholes seems okay. But you know, it's like anything in life. You know, when someone loses your trust, I mean, that's it. And actually, I moved on to Option View. Option Net Explorer, and I had lesser expectations for that one. I know it's still a work in progress. It does a fair job, but it can do better. But no, I've decided to do my own, and if at least on Excel or whatever tool you can do your own calculations, you will feel a lot more confident about trading. What's going on? Because it's not just, I mean, if you trade following a mentor or whatever guidelines or strategy, and you've got those delta rule to adjust, and I mean, you're gonna get hurt at some point. I mean, that's my belief, is that you need to know what's going on. That's why I'm actually sharing this view, this approach with you on these sessions. Steve White Paper is now posted. Okay, great. Thanks, Gary. Is it humid? Oh yeah, I already have to put the aircon on, and not a big fan of aircon because it's not very good for the environment, but it's almost unbearable. It's very humid. Yeah. I thought it would be humid only in middle of summer, but this is only springtime now, and it's already pretty hot and humid. Yeah. Not very hot actually, but very humid. Yeah. Which is not, I mean, it's okay. It's okay. I'm not doing any physical work. I can't complain. Yeah. I just have to put the aircon and life goes on. But anyway, it's better than the cold. You know. So, yeah. I've been a swallow all my life. I think in my long life, I haven't spent many winters in the cold. Yeah, anyway, but that's me. Okay, guys, if there are no more questions, we're close to an hour, so can call it a day. And by the way, it's 8 o'clock here, 8 p.m. So I'm going to wish myself a nice and easy evening, and I wish you a good day. And see you next time. 2 weeks time. I haven't decided on a topic, but I think I've done everything. I can actually, you know, say more about pricing, but I think it's good that you have a bit of work to do. That's why I give you some exercises. And if you need help to do your pricer, I can do that. But I will slowly get back into modeling. I've got some other interesting relationships. Some people call it the super tree. There are a few things we can get out of put call parity and Black-Scholes, and then maybe in a month's time I will start start showing you volatility surface. It's going to be a more advanced topic. At least Gary will follow, and I hope he can help me because he's done a lot of work in that already. Anyway, thank you, and have a nice rest of the day.